In the grim darkness of the far future, where mercy is a forgotten luxury and compassion is deemed weakness, there exists a space marine chapter that defies the cold calculus of endless war. The Salamanders stand as an anomaly among the Emperor's finest, warriors who have never forgotten that beneath the armor and genetic enhancement, they were once mortal men who lived among families, who knew the warmth of hearth fires, who understood what it meant to protect rather than simply to destroy. This is the story of what happens when one of their most ancient warriors, entombed within a walking sarcophagus of adamantium and ceramite, falls into the hands of the galaxy's most brutal and paradoxically innocent race. It is a story about memory, about what makes us human even when humanity seems lost, and about the strange places where understanding can bloom in a universe designed for nothing but war. The nature of the green tide. The Orks are a paradox wrapped in green skin and strapped with enough firepower to level a city block. They are a race born for war, genetically engineered by the ancient Old Ones during the War in Heaven, designed to be the perfect soldiers in a conflict that tore the galaxy apart millions of years before humanity even learned to make fire. Every Ork emerges from fungal spores with an instinctive understanding of violence, an innate knowledge of how to fight, kill, and survive in the most hostile environments imaginable. They grow larger and stronger through combat, their physiology rewarding aggression with physical might, creating a society where the biggest and meanest rise to the top through sheer brutality. But to understand the Orks as merely mindless brutes is to fundamentally misunderstand what makes them so dangerous. Yes, they love nothing more than a good scrap, and yes, their idea of diplomacy involves seeing how many heads they can crack before someone bigger tells them to stop. But within that love of violence exists something remarkably pure, something almost innocent in its directness. Orks do not fight for ideology or conquest or some grand vision of the future. They fight because fighting is what they were made to do, and they approach it with the same enthusiasm that a human child might approach their favorite game. This psychological makeup creates a culture that is simultaneously terrifying and oddly straightforward. An Ork warband operates on principles that are brutally simple yet infinitely complex in their execution. The biggest Ork is the boss because he can beat up anyone who disagrees. The best weapons belong to those strong enough to take them or clever enough to make them. Territory is claimed by planting your banner on it and daring anyone to knock it down. It is a society of pure meritocracy enforced through violence, where every day brings new challenges and new opportunities to prove your worth in the only way that matters to an Ork, through glorious combat. Yet within this culture of constant warfare exists something that other races often fail to recognize: curiosity. Orks are fascinated by technology, by weapons, by anything that makes a loud noise or causes impressive destruction. Their mech boys, the technical caste of Ork society, possess an almost instinctive understanding of mechanical principles that would shame many human engineers. They can take the most disparate components, pieces scavenged from a dozen different sources, and somehow make them function through a combination of ingenuity, brute force, and the peculiar psychic field that all Orks generate collectively. This psychic field, this gestalt consciousness that connects all greenskins, is perhaps the most remarkable and least understood aspect of Ork biology. It allows their ramshackle technology to function despite seemingly violating every known law of physics. A gun assembled from scrap metal and random components will fire if an Ork believes it will fire. A vehicle painted red will go faster because every Ork knows that red ones go faster. It is not magic, not exactly, but rather a form of collective reality manipulation, where belief becomes truth when enough Orks share that belief. The mech boys serve as the conduits and amplifiers of this effect. Their innate technical knowledge, encoded into their very genes by the Old Ones, gives them an intuitive grasp of mechanical principles that they express through crude but effective engineering. They do not truly understand why things work the way they do, any more than a human understands the biochemistry of breathing, but they know what works and what does not, with a certainty that comes from deep genetic memory. When orcs encounter enemy technology, particularly technology from the more advanced races, their reaction is one of immediate and intense interest. They do not see a sophisticated piece of Imperial engineering as something to be feared or respected. They see a new toy, a challenge to be overcome, something to be taken apart and rebuilt in ways that make more sense to the orc mind. This is not destruction for its own sake, but rather a form of aggressive curiosity, the desire to understand through disassembly and reconstruction. This scavenging instinct extends to everything an orc warband encounters on the battlefield. Weapons, armor, vehicles, even entire buildings if they look interesting enough, all become potential loot to be claimed and repurposed. The Death Skulls clan in particular have elevated this practice to an art form, their obsession with looting becoming legendary even among their fellow greenskins. They believe that blue is lucky, and so they paint everything blue in the hopes that fortune will smile upon their acquisitions. But what happens when orcs encounter something they have never seen before? Something that challenges their understanding of what constitutes loot? What happens when they capture not just a machine, but a tomb containing a living warrior whose very existence blurs the line between flesh and steel? The Salamanders, humanity's guardians. Among the 1,000 chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, among the countless warriors who have sworn oaths to defend humanity from the horrors that press in from all sides, the Salamanders stand apart. They are the sons of Vulcan, the Primarch who embodied the ideal that strength should be used to protect rather than merely to dominate. Where other chapters see civilians as resources to be managed or obstacles to be worked around, the Salamanders see people worthy of protection, lives that matter as much as any strategic objective. This philosophy did not emerge from doctrine or training, but from the very culture of their homeworld. Nocturne is a death world, a volcanic nightmare where tectonic activity can reshape continents in a matter of hours, and the sky glows with the reflected light of molten rock. Life there exists in 7 sanctuary cities, built to withstand the planet's fury, communities that must work together to survive in an environment that seems determined to kill them. When the young Vulcan was discovered by the Emperor, he was not a warlord or a conqueror, but a blacksmith and protector, a figure revered by the people, not for his ability to make war, but for his dedication to keeping them safe. That legacy lives on in every salamander who walks the galaxy. Unlike most Space Marine chapters, which sever all ties with their mortal past upon ascension, the Salamanders maintain connections with their families and communities. They live among the people of Nocturne when not called to battle, serving as leaders and guardians, keeping alive the understanding that they are not simply weapons, but warriors with a purpose beyond killing. This makes them slower to recruit than other chapters, their numbers always smaller than the Codex Astartes would recommend. But every warrior they produce carries within him an unshakable conviction about what they are fighting for. The Second War for Armageddon provided perhaps the clearest demonstration of what makes the Salamanders unique. When warlord Gazgakul Mag Uruk Thraka descended upon that industrial world with millions of orcs at his command, the Imperium responded with overwhelming force. Multiple Space Marine chapters deployed alongside uncounted regiments of the Imperial Guard, creating a military presence of staggering scale. The Blood Angels under Chapter Master Dante coordinated the defense. The Ultramarines held the hive cities, and various other chapters took positions across the combat zones. And the Salamanders, under their newly appointed Chapter Master Tushan, took on the mission that other chapters saw as secondary, protecting the civilians. While other Astartes pursued glory and direct combat against the orc hordes, the Salamanders positioned themselves at refugee camps, evacuation routes, and civilian shelters. They held bridges for days against overwhelming odds, not to secure strategic positions, but to allow non-combatants to reach safety. They defended water purification plants, not because of their tactical importance, but because without them, millions would die of thirst. This attitude brought them into direct conflict with chapters that operated under different philosophies. The incident involving the Marines' Malevolent became infamous across the sector and beyond, when an Ork warband broke through Imperial defenses and penetrated a refugee camp near Hades' Hive, taking over 12,000 civilians hostage. The Marines' Malevolent responded with their whirlwind artillery. They waited deliberately for the Orks to mix among the refugees, ensuring maximum greenskin casualties, then opened fire with anti-personnel munitions that shredded Ork and human alike. Captain Vinya of the Marines, Malevolent, defended his actions with cold logic. The refugees, he argued, were acceptable casualties in the pursuit of military objectives. Their deaths saved time and resources that could be better spent elsewhere. There was no such thing as innocence, he proclaimed, only degrees of guilt, and those who allowed themselves to be captured had proven themselves unworthy of the Emperor's protection. When Chapter Master Tushan confronted him about the 4,000 dead refugees, Vinya spat at the feet of an Imperial Guard colonel who dared question his methods. He spoke of the Marines' malevolent superiority in war, their understanding that victory required hard choices and harder hearts. And then he turned to face Tushan, perhaps expecting agreement, or at least understanding from a fellow Space Marine. What he received instead was a rebuke that echoed across the command center and later across the entire Imperium. Tushan, whose chapter revered above all else the protection of innocent life, told Vinya and his entire chapter that they had betrayed everything they were sworn to protect. The power-armored fingers that could crush skulls gestured toward the refugee camp where bodies were still being counted, and Tushan's voice carried the weight of absolute moral certainty. Those people were not acceptable casualties. They were the very reason Space Marines existed at all. The confrontation nearly came to blows, and many who witnessed it spoke of the fury barely contained within Tushan's massive frame. Only the discipline earned through decades of service and the wisdom of his position kept the chapter master from physically attacking Vinya on the spot. But the message was delivered, and it resonated throughout the Imperial forces present. Here was a Space Marine chapter that actually cared, that saw value in individual human lives beyond their utility as soldiers or workers. This philosophy extends into every aspect of Salamander culture. Their chaplains preach not just of duty and honor, but of the sacred responsibility to protect those weaker than themselves. Their tech marines craft weapons and armor with the same care they would give to works of art, understanding that these tools will be used to defend the defenseless. Their apothecaries tend not just to their battle brothers, but to civilians caught in war zones, applying their advanced medical knowledge to save lives that most Astartes would consider beneath their notice. The physical marks of their homeworld show on every salamander. The radiation and unique minerals of Nocturne react with their gene seed to produce coal-black skin and eyes that glow like embers in the darkness. These features, combined with their often larger-than-average build even for Space Marines, give them an intimidating appearance that belies their protective nature. Children who might flee in terror from the sight of other Astartes learn to recognize the green armor and drake symbols of the Salamanders as signs of safety rather than threats. Their mastery of fire-based weapons is both practical and symbolic. Flamers and melter guns see more use in Salamander armories than in any other chapter, weapons that can purge the taint of chaos or reduce heretical structures to molten slag. But fire also represents cleansing, renewal, the forge that tempers steel into something stronger. Every salamander learns the arts of the smith, understanding that creation and destruction are two sides of the same coin, that the hands that wield the flamer can also craft beauty from raw materials. This combination of martial prowess and humanitarian concern creates warriors unlike any others in the Imperium. A salamander, advancing across a battlefield, does not see just terrain and target points. He sees homes that will need rebuilding, civilians who will need protection, infrastructure that must be preserved whenever possible. The calculus of war for a salamander includes factors that other chapters ignore entirely, and while this sometimes makes them seem inefficient by cold strategic standards, it also makes them the chapter that civilians pray will answer their calls for aid. The Dreadnought's existence. To become a Dreadnought is to experience death without dying, to cross a threshold from which there can be no return to what you once were. It begins with catastrophic injury, wounds so severe that even the formidable regenerative abilities of a space marine cannot repair them. A body shattered by the strike of a Titan's weapon, organs liquefied by exposure to extreme temperatures, a spine severed by the blow that should have ended everything. In those moments when mortal injury meets superhuman constitution, when the warrior hovers in the space between life and death, a choice is made. Most brothers who fall in battle are granted the mercy of death, their gene seed harvested to create the next generation of warriors, their names added to the rolls of honor, where they will be remembered for all time. But for a few, for those deemed too valuable to lose, or those who possess knowledge and experience that cannot be replaced, the chapter's apothecaries and tech marines offer another option. They can transfer what remains of the warrior into a new body, a walking tomb of adamantium and ceramite that will allow him to continue serving the Emperor long after his flesh has failed. The process is a surgical horror that pushes the boundaries of what the Mechanicus considers possible. The dying warrior's body is stripped away piece by piece, everything that is not essential to maintaining consciousness removed with mechanical precision. Limbs are severed, organs that can no longer function properly are extracted, bones that will never heal are cut away. What remains is reduced to the bare minimum: the brain and spinal cord, a few critical organs to maintain basic biological function, enough flesh to keep the neural tissue alive. This remnant of a human being is then placed into an armored sarcophagus filled with nutrient-rich amniotic fluid. Thousands of neural connections are made, cables that burrow into the brain and link the warrior's consciousness directly to the Dreadnought's machine systems. The mind impulse unit creates a bridge between thought and action, allowing the entombed marine to control the massive walking machine as if it were his own body. But the translation is imperfect, filtered through layers of technology and artificial sensation that can never quite replicate the feeling of true flesh. The first moments of awakening are described by those few who have survived them as a form of sensory hell. The warrior tries to move his arms and finds only weapon systems responding to his commands. He attempts to breathe and hears only the mechanical wheeze of life support. He seeks his heartbeat and discovers instead the thrumming of power generators and coolant systems. Everything that defined his physical existence has been replaced by cold machinery, and yet his mind remains trapped within this metal shell, fully aware of everything he has lost. Most newly interred Dreadnoughts experience a period of psychological trauma so severe that they must be kept in medically induced unconsciousness until their minds can adjust to their new reality. Dreams become nightmares of paralysis and entombment, memories of physical sensation turning into cruel reminders of a body that no longer exists. The warrior remembers the feeling of sun on his face, wind in his hair, the simple act of eating a meal, or drawing breath without mechanical assistance. All of these experiences are now forever beyond his reach. But the chapters that employ Dreadnoughts are not cruel for the sake of cruelty. They understand that what they ask of these warriors is perhaps the greatest sacrifice imaginable: to live when death would be merciful, to serve when rest has been earned 10 times over. And so they offer what comfort they can in the form of sleep. Between battles, when the Dreadnought is not needed, the sarcophagus is removed from its armored shell and placed into stasis. The warrior inside falls into a dreamless unconsciousness that can last for decades or even centuries, awakening only when the chapter has need of his strength and wisdom. These sleep cycles become both blessing and curse. The blessing is obvious. In sleep, there is no awareness of the prison that holds you, no sensation of being trapped within an unfeeling shell of metal. But the curse is more subtle and far more terrible. Each period of sleep erodes something from the warrior's mind, wearing away at memories like waves against stone. The organic components of the brain, no longer supported by a fully functional body, begin to deteriorate in ways that even the most advanced life support systems cannot prevent. The first things lost are often the most recent memories, experiences from the warrior's time as a flesh and blood space marine fading like morning mist. Names of brothers who fought beside him become harder to recall. Faces blur together into indistinct shapes. Specific battles merge into a general impression of violence and glory, without the details that made each one unique. It is not Alzheimer's or dementia in any conventional sense, but rather a slow erosion of identity caused by the fundamental incompatibility between organic neural tissue and extended cybernetic existence. As centuries pass, the degradation continues. The warrior begins to lose not just recent memories, but older ones as well, fragments of his life before becoming a space marine disappearing into darkness. He forgets the face of his mother, the sound of his father's voice, the names of childhood friends who never survived the trials that transformed him into an Astartes. These losses might seem insignificant to those who view space marines as weapons without pasts, but they represent the final threads connecting the warrior to his humanity. And as they snap one by one, something essential begins to slip away. The most ancient dreadnoughts, those who have served for millennia, often display signs of this profound psychological damage. They speak in archaic dialects that have not been used for thousands of years, their language frozen in the era when they first fell in battle. They reference brothers who died in campaigns that have faded from all but the most ancient records. They struggle to understand the modern galaxy, confused by political situations or technological developments that occurred during their long sleeps. Some become irritable and withdrawn, frustrated by their inability to connect with the warriors around them. Others grow distant and philosophical, speaking in riddles and metaphors that reflect minds that have drifted far from conventional human cognition. Yet despite all this horror, despite the slow erosion of self and the endless cycle of sleep and violence, most dreadnoughts maintain a core of identity that persists even through centuries of entombment. This core is built from the principles and training that made them space marines in the first place. The indoctrination and conditioning that runs deeper than memory or personality. A Dark Angel Dreadnought will maintain his chapter's obsession with hidden truths. A Space Wolf Dreadnought will retain his love of sagas and brotherhood. And a Salamander Dreadnought will never forget the fundamental truth that was beaten into him from the moment he began his transformation. Protect the innocent, defend the weak, fight not for glory, but for the people who cannot fight for themselves. This persistence of core values is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Dreadnought experience. Even as specific memories fade, even as personality traits erode and cognitive function declines, the fundamental principles that defined the warrior remain. It is as if the indoctrination process that creates a space marine burns these values so deeply into the psyche that they become inseparable from consciousness itself, surviving even when almost everything else has been stripped away. For a Salamander Dreadnought, this means that no matter how many years pass, no matter how much of his former self is lost to the ravages of time and mechanical existence, he will never lose sight of why he fights. The faces of specific civilians may blur and fade, but the principle of protecting civilians remains crystal clear. The details of individual evacuations may be forgotten, but the memory of holding the line so that innocents could reach safety persists as a defining characteristic of his consciousness. When worlds collide, the capture, the battle that would lead to the unthinkable began, like countless others across the Imperium's endless war zones. A mining colony on the edge of the Segmentum Ultima had sent desperate astropathic messages reporting Ork raiders in nearby systems, green-skinned hordes growing bolder with each passing week. The Salamanders responded as they always did, deploying elements of their third company to investigate and eliminate the threat before it could spread to more populated regions. Brother Ancient Bakken had walked the battlefields of the Imperium for over 500 years. His original body had fallen during the defense of a shrine world against a chaos incursion, crushed beneath the rubble of a collapsing cathedral after holding a choke point long enough for 15,000 pilgrims to reach evacuation ships. The chapter's tech marines had recovered his broken form and offered him the choice that all mortally wounded salamanders received: final rest among his honored dead brothers, or continued service in the shell of a dreadnought. He had chosen service, as so many before him had chosen, and for 5 centuries he had served as a walking monument to the chapter's values. The memories of his time before entombment had faded significantly over those centuries. He could no longer recall his birth name or the face of his mortal family on Nocturne. The specific details of his transformation into a space marine had blurred into a general impression of trials and pain and eventual triumph. But the core of what made him a salamander, the unwavering commitment to protecting human life, remained as strong as the day he first swore his oaths. If anything, the years had strengthened this conviction, as he witnessed generation after generation of salamanders living up to Vulcan's teachings. The mining colony of Prometheus's Hope had been established on a world rich in rare minerals needed for plasma weapon manufacturing, a collection of habitation domes and processing facilities that housed approximately 40,000 workers and their families. Intelligence reports suggested that the Ork raiders were a relatively small force, perhaps a few thousand greenskins under the command of a minor war boss who had broken away from a larger to seek his own glory. It should have been a straightforward operation: deploy, eliminate the threat, ensure the colony's safety, depart. But the Orks had been significantly underestimated. What appeared to be a minor raiding force was actually the vanguard of a much larger warband that had been hiding in the asteroid fields surrounding the system. When the Salamander's strike cruiser entered orbit, they found themselves facing not thousands, but tens of thousands of Orks, a horde that had been slowly gathering strength while using small raids to mask their true numbers. The war boss leading them was no minor chieftain, but an experienced nob named Grisnak Iron Teeth, who had learned cunning along with cruelty during decades of warfare. The Salamanders found themselves fighting a defensive battle instead of the offensive operation they had planned. Captain Enkeln made the only decision that his training and his chapter's philosophy would allow. Instead of withdrawing to regroup, the Third Company would hold their ground and protect the colonists while calling for reinforcements. It was a decision that every Salamander understood, even as they recognized the terrible cost it might demand. Brother Ancient Bakken was deployed at the main approach to the colony's central habitation complex, positioned where his heavy weapons could create a killing field that would slow the Ork advance. His assault cannon spoke with mechanical thunder, each burst of fire cutting through the green tide like a scythe through wheat. His power fist crushed Ork vehicles and smashed through their crude fortifications, his centuries of experience allowing him to identify and eliminate threats with cold efficiency. For 3 days he held his position, weathering attacks that would have broken conventional defensive lines a dozen times over. But the Orks kept coming, and with each wave they learned. Grisnak Ironteef was cunning enough to recognize that the huge walking machine was the linchpin of the human defense, and brutal enough to order suicide charges specifically designed to bring it down. Ork vehicles loaded with explosives crashed into Bakken's position, detonating in massive fireballs that scarred his armor but did not breach it. Tank busters fired, concentrated volleys of rockets that forced him back step by step. Meganobs closed in melee range, their power claws searching for weak points in his chassis. The killing blow came from an unexpected direction. A looted wagon that the Orks had captured and modified with typically excessive firepower managed to maneuver through the chaos of battle until it had a clear line on Bakken's back. The plasma weapon they had somehow mounted to it, a piece of advanced technology they did not truly understand, but knew made things explode real good, fired a sustained burst directly into the Dreadnought's rear armor plating, where the power coupling connected to his sarcophagus. The plasma bolt did not penetrate fully, but the thermal shock was catastrophic. Systems that had functioned for centuries suddenly went dark. Coolant systems ruptured, flooding delicate mechanisms with superheated liquid. The mind impulse unit that connected Baken's consciousness to his mechanical body suffered cascading failures that sent false signals screaming through his nervous system. For a moment, that seemed to stretch into eternity, he experienced every sensor in his frame reporting critical damage simultaneously, a cacophony of failure that his organic brain struggled to process. Then the emergency protocols kicked in, and Baken's world went dark as his sarcophagus automatically sealed and initiated its independent life support systems. From the outside, the mighty Dreadnought that had held the Orks at bay for 3 days simply stopped moving, its weapons falling silent mid-burst, its massive frame freezing in place like a statue of an ancient warrior. The Orks swarmed over the fallen giant with whoops of triumph, dozens of greenskins climbing on the motionless Dreadnought and claiming credit for bringing down the mighty war machine. For a moment it seemed they would simply tear it apart for parts, stripping away the armor plating and weapons to be used in their own crude constructions. But Grisnak Ironteeth pushed through the mob and stared at the machine with an expression that would have been contemplative on a less brutish face. This was not just a vehicle or a weapon. Even an Ork could see that this was something different, something that combined machine and something else in a way their looted wagons never did. The careful way it had fought, the strategic positioning, the focused fire on priority targets, all of this spoke of intelligence guiding the massive frame. And Orks, despite their reputation for mindless violence, respected cunning and skill when they saw it. "Get the mechs," Grisnak ordered, his voice carrying the authority of unchallenged dominance. "I wants to know what makes this thing work." It was a command that would lead to one of the strangest confrontations in the long history of the Salamanders chapter, and one that would test the fundamental question of what it means to maintain your humanity when your very existence has been reduced to consciousness, trapped within a mechanical shell. The Mech Boys' intervention. The workshop where the Orks brought their prize was a ramshackle structure that defied conventional understanding of engineering principles. It had been constructed from the crashed remains of an Imperial transport ship, with walls made from hull plates welded together at odd angles, and a roof consisting of armor plating held up by support beams that looked like they might collapse at any moment. Inside, a chaotic collection of machinery in various states of assembly or disassembly filled every available space, the air thick with the smell of promethium, burning metal, and that peculiar ozone scent that accompanied Ork technology. 3 mech boys converged on the captured Dreadnought with the focused intensity that only true craftsmen display when confronted with an interesting puzzle. Gricket was the oldest, his green skin crossed with scars from decades of explosive experiments, and his mechanical right arm a testament to the dangers of his profession. Borguz was younger but talented, his natural instinct for machinery marking him as potentially the next big mech of the warband if he survived long enough. The third, a runt named Snazgit, served primarily as a fetcher and holder of tools, but his sharp eyes caught details that his larger colleagues sometimes missed. They circled the motionless Dreadnought, like predators examining dangerous prey, grunting and gesturing as they pointed out features that caught their interest. The assault cannon with its multiple barrels capable of impressive dakka, the power fist with its energy field that could crush tanks, the armor plating that had withstood direct hits from their biggest guns. All of it represented technology they wanted to understand, to take apart, to rebuild in ways that made sense to the Ork mind. "We gonna strip it for parts?" Borguz asked, already imagining how that assault cannon could be mounted on his war buggy. "Or we gonna try to get it working and use it ourselves?" The question was practical from an Ork perspective. Looted technology was valuable, but functional looted technology was a prize worth bragging about for years. Gricket ran his mechanical hand over the Dreadnought's chassis, feeling the quality of the craftsmanship with an appreciation that transcended species. "This ain't like the other Hume machines we grabbed," he said thoughtfully. "This one's special. I can feel it. We figure out how it works. We learn something good." His instincts, honed through decades of taking apart and rebuilding everything from guns to war engines, told him there was something unusual about this particular machine. They started with the obvious external components, documenting in their crude way how the various systems connected and functioned. The weapon mounts came off first, heavy bolter and assault cannon carefully removed and set aside for later installation on other vehicles. The armor plating was more challenging, sealed with technology that the mechs respected, even as they figured out ways to break it. Beneath the external layers, they found the sophisticated targeting systems, the power distribution networks, the coolant lines and ammunition feeds that kept the Dreadnought operational, and then they found the sarcophagus. It was buried deep within the Dreadnought's torso, protected by multiple layers of armor and shielding, connected to the machine by thousands of cables and tubes. The moment they exposed it, all three mechs knew they had discovered something significant. This was not a control system like the ones in their looted wagons. This was something that looked almost biological, a container that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, maintaining an environment separate from the machine that surrounded it. "What's in there?" Snazgit asked, his smaller size allowing him to squeeze closer and peer at the readouts and displays that covered the sarcophagus's surface. "Looks like it's keeping something alive." His tone held genuine curiosity rather than malice. Orks could be cruel, certainly, but they were not gratuitously so. They killed because it was fun, and because it was what they were made to do, not out of any particular hatred for their enemies. Gricket studied the life support systems with growing fascination. Here was technology that did not just keep a machine running, but sustained something living within it. The concept intrigued him in ways that simple weapons or vehicles never could. "The machine's got something inside it, something important." He traced the neural connection cables that ran from the sarcophagus throughout the Dreadnought's frame. I think this is how the Hume controls it. Days inside the machine, making it work." This revelation changed everything. What they had thought was simply a powerful war machine was actually something far more interesting. A warrior who had become part of his weapon, or a weapon that had been given a warrior's mind. The distinction was unclear from an Ork perspective, but the fundamental strangeness of it captured their imagination completely. The mechs had disassembled and rebuilt hundreds of human machines over the years. They understood Imperial tanks, knew how to hotwire land raiders, could figure out the basic principles of even the most sophisticated vehicles given enough time and willingness to make things explode. But this was different. This required them to understand not just mechanics, but the intersection of flesh and machine, the point where organic life and cold metal merged into something that was simultaneously both and neither. "Can we wake it up?" Borguz asked, the practical question cutting through their theoretical speculation. "If there's a Hume and Dare controlling it, maybe we can make it work for us." The idea had obvious appeal. An Ork-controlled Dreadnought would be a trophy worth showing to any war boss, proof of technical mastery that would earn respect throughout the warband. Gricket considered the question carefully, his mechanical fingers drumming against his tool harness as he thought. "Maybe, but we gotta be careful. Don't want to break it just when we's learning something good." He pointed at the various displays and monitors surrounding the sarcophagus. "See all these things? They's watching how the Hume inside is doing. If we mess with the wrong thing, we might kill whatever's in there." The concept of being careful was not one that Orks naturally embraced. Their approach to problem solving usually involved hitting things until they worked or exploded, with both outcomes considered at least somewhat successful. But even Orks could recognize when brute force was inappropriate, when the value of understanding exceeded the immediate satisfaction of destruction. They spent hours examining the life support systems, tracing how nutrients were delivered and waste removed, how the temperature was regulated and the atmosphere maintained. The sophistication of it impressed even these masters of crude engineering, the recognition that sometimes precision and delicacy could achieve things that raw power could not. Each discovery led to more questions. more curiosity about how the system functioned as a whole. Finally, Gricket made his decision. "We try waking it up, but slow like. We don't go changing nothing yet. Just see if the Humi inside can hear us." He reached for a control panel that seemed to regulate the power flow to the sarcophagus. "And we keep something heavy ready, just in case it wakes up angry." A voice in the dark for Brother Ancient Bakken. Consciousness returned like surfacing from deep water, a slow ascent through layers of darkness toward a distant light. At first, there was only the awareness of existing, the fundamental certainty of thought that confirmed he still lived, even when all sensory input suggested otherwise. Then came the recognition of his situation, memories flooding back of the plasma strike, and the cascading system failures, and the emergency protocols sealing his sarcophagus. He tried to move, and found his connection to the Dreadnought's frame completely severed. The mind impulse unit that normally translated his thoughts into mechanical action was silent, leaving him trapped within the sarcophagus, with no way to interact with the world outside. It was like being paralyzed, but worse, because he could remember what it felt like to command a body, even a mechanical one, and now that capability was gone. His audio sensors still functioned, however, and through them, he heard sounds that made no sense in the context of his last memories. Instead of the battle cries of his brother Salamanders or the roar of weapons fire, he heard voices speaking in the guttural language of Orks. Instead of the clean workshop sounds of Imperial tech marines, he heard the clang and crash of crude tools and the distinctive whine of poorly maintained power systems. The realization came slowly, but with absolute certainty. He had been captured. His Dreadnought shell had been taken by the enemy, and now he was in their hands with no way to fight back or escape. For any space marine, captivity was a fate worse than death, but for a Dreadnought, the horror was magnified 1,000-fold. He could not even end his own life. He was dependent on life support systems that were now controlled by Xenos, who had every reason to keep him alive for study or sport. 500 years of service had not prepared him for this particular nightmare. He had faced death countless times, had welcomed it even, knowing that each battle might be his last. But this was not death. This was helplessness, dependency, the knowledge that his fate now rested entirely in the hands of creatures he had been designed to destroy. The psychological weight of it pressed down on him like a physical force, threatening to overwhelm the discipline that had sustained him through 5 centuries of existence. Then he heard the voice, filtered through his audio sensors, speaking in broken Gothic, with an accent so thick it was almost unintelligible. "Oi, Humi in the box, you awake in there?" The question was followed by the sound of metal being struck, probably one of the Orks hitting his sarcophagus with something. "We knows you's in there. Saw all the readouts changing when you woke up." The rational part of Bakken's mind understood that responding was pointless at best and potentially dangerous. These were Orks, mindless brutes who lived only for violence and destruction. Anything he said would either be ignored or used against him. The smart response was silence, maintaining operational security even in captivity, denying the enemy any information that might prove useful. But another part of him, a part that had been slowly eroded over 5 centuries of mechanical existence, desperately needed to communicate with something, anything, that could acknowledge his existence. The long sleeps between battles had isolated him from his battle brothers, and each awakening found fewer and fewer warriors who remembered him from before his entombment. He had been drifting toward a kind of existential loneliness that comes from being ancient in a world that continues without you. And now that loneliness threatened to overwhelm what remained of his sanity. "I am Brother Ancient Bakken of the Salamanders' 3rd Company," he said finally, his mechanical voice emerging from the sarcophagus's external speakers. "And I will give you nothing, Xenos filth." It was defiance born of desperation, the need to assert some form of control over his situation, even when he had none. The response was not what he expected. Instead of threats or violence, he heard what sounded like excited chattering in the Ork language, multiple voices overlapping as they reacted to his words. Then the one who had spoken before addressed him again, and this time there was something in the tone that almost resembled curiosity. "So you's a human what lives in there? Machine? That's proper weird, that is. How's that work, then?" The orc seemed genuinely interested, approaching the question with the earnestness of a child asking about something fascinating. "Do you see through the machine's eyes? Feel when it gets hit? How's you control all the weapons and things?" The questions caught Baken completely off guard. He had expected threats, torture, demands for information about Imperial deployments or defensive positions. The last thing he anticipated was a technical discussion about how Dreadnoughts functioned. "Why do you care, Xenos?" he asked, unable to keep a note of confusion from coloring his mechanical voice. "'Cause it's interesting, innit?" Gricket replied, and the simplicity of the answer was perhaps its most disarming quality. "We's never seen nothing like this before. Machines we know how to strip 'em down and make 'em work for us. But this is different. This is a human what's part of the machine, or a machine what's part of a human, and we want to understand how it works." Over the next several hours, an utterly surreal conversation developed between the captured salamander and his orc captors. At first, Baken refused to answer their questions out of simple military discipline, but he quickly realized that the mech boys were perfectly capable of figuring things out through direct experimentation. If he wanted to maintain any influence over what they did to his sarcophagus and life support systems, he needed to guide their curiosity in directions that would not kill him. So he began to explain, in the simplest terms possible, how the mind impulse unit worked to translate neural signals into mechanical commands. He described the balance between organic tissue and mechanical components, the delicate equilibrium that kept a Dreadnought pilot alive despite catastrophic injuries that should have been fatal. He talked about the sleep cycles and the slow erosion of memory, though he did not explain why the chapters employed this practice or what strategic advantages it offered. The mechs listened with an attention that would have shocked any Imperial commander familiar with orc behavior. They asked surprisingly insightful questions about power distribution and signal routing, about how the biological components interfaced with the mechanical systems. Their understanding of the underlying principles was instinctive rather than theoretical, expressed in crude terms, but demonstrating genuine comprehension of complex concepts. What disturbed Baken most was not their curiosity, but the growing realization that these Xenos were not the mindless brutes he had been taught to expect. They were curious, creative, even oddly respectful of the craftsmanship that had gone into his construction. They did not see him as simply an enemy to be destroyed, but as a puzzle to be solved, a challenge that engaged their natural mechanical talents. "You fought good out there," Gricket said at one point, his tone carrying what might have been approval. "Held the line for days, took out loads of our boys. That's proper fighting, that is. If you wasn't in that box, we'd probably give you a good scrap face to face." The compliment, if it could be called that, was delivered with complete sincerity. Trapped within his sarcophagus, cut off from any hope of immediate rescue, Brother Ancient Baken found himself engaged in the strangest conversation of his long existence. And despite himself, despite everything he had been taught about the Xenos threat, he discovered something unsettling. These orcs, for all their brutality and crudeness, possessed something that many of the humans he had fought alongside lacked. They possessed genuine curiosity, unburdened by fear or hatred, approaching the universe with a kind of innocent enthusiasm that seemed almost alien in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. Memories of protection. As the hours turned to days and Gricket's experiments continued, Baken found his thoughts returning again and again to the memories that defined him not as a weapon, but as a warrior with purpose. The mech boys' questions about how he functioned had led inevitably to questions about why, about what drove him to fight, and what goals he pursued beyond simple survival. And in trying to answer those questions to beings who understood violence but not necessarily purpose, he was forced to examine the core beliefs that had sustained him through 5 centuries of mechanical existence. He told them about Prometheus's hope, the mining colony he had been defending when they captured him. 40,000 people living on a world that would have killed them without the infrastructure their labor maintained. Families who worked in the processing plants and returned to hab units where children played and learned and grew. He described how the evacuation had been going when his systems failed, how hundreds of colonists were still making their way to the transport ships when the Orks finally overran his position. "Why'd you care?" Borgers asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "They ain't fighters. They ain't even proper ard. What's the point of defending humies what can't defend themselves?" It was not mockery, but honest puzzlement. The question of a being whose entire culture revolved around strength and combat prowess. Bakken struggled to find words that would make sense to an orc. How could he explain to creatures who saw weakness as something to be exploited that protecting the weak was the highest calling a warrior could answer? How could he convey to beings who measured worth in combat ability that there were other forms of value, other reasons for existence beyond fighting? "Because they are what we were," he said finally. "Before the gene seed and the surgeries and the training, every space marine was mortal. Weak by our standards, yes, but possessing something that we gave up when we became weapons. Families, futures, dreams that extended beyond the next battle. Those, people at Prometheus's hope, they are what humanity is meant to be. We Salamanders exist so that they can continue existing." He found himself telling them stories from his long service, memories that he had not revisited in decades, bubbling up from the depths of his consciousness. The evacuation of Hive Scorius, when tyrannid tendrils had descended from orbit, how he had held a choke point for 16 hours while millions of civilians fled through the Undercity, the refugees on Armageddon, families clutching whatever possessions they could carry as they fled the Ork hordes, looking to the Salamanders for protection that they provided, without question or hesitation. The incident that weighed most heavily on his memory involved a single child. It had been during a campaign against a chaos cult on an agri-world, the kind of operation where civilian casualties were considered inevitable by most Imperial forces. A little girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old, had been separated from her parents during the fighting. She had hidden in the rubble of a destroyed building, terrified into silence while cultists and Imperial forces clashed around her position. Bakken, even in his Dreadnought shell, had heard her crying. The audio sensors that allowed him to detect enemy movement had picked up the quiet sobbing, the sound of a child who had witnessed horrors no young mind should have to process. Following that sound, he had found her huddled in a corner, covered in dust and shaking with fear. And despite the fact that his squad was engaged with enemy forces less than 100 meters away, despite the tactical necessity of maintaining his position, he had stayed with that child until reinforcements arrived who could carry her to safety. "You stopped fighting just to watch over one little humie?" Snazgit asked, his voice full of wonder. Even though there was more enemies to kill, the concept seemed to boggle his mind. The idea that a warrior would prioritize protection over destruction. "She needed protection more than the cultists needed killing," Bakken replied. "My brothers could handle the combat. Only I was in position to ensure that child survived." He paused, accessing memories that had grown dim over the centuries. "She reminded me of someone, a face I can barely remember now, someone from before I became this. I think she might have been my sister, my mortal sister, from before my transformation." The memory was fragmentary, eroded by time and the degradation that came with extended life in a Dreadnought shell. But the emotion attached to it remained strong, a core conviction that had survived even when the specific details faded. Protecting the innocent was not just a tactical decision or a chapter doctrine. It was the last thread connecting him to the human he had once been, the final proof that beneath all the metal and machinery, something fundamentally human persisted. Gricket was quiet for a long moment after Bakken finished that story. When he spoke again, his voice carried a thoughtfulness that seemed at odds with his brutish appearance. "We don't do that. Orks, I mean. We fight because fighting's fun, and we protect our own because that's how the mob works. But protecting other things what can't fight back, that ain't part of how we does things. Perhaps it should be, Baken said quietly. The words surprised him as much as they must have surprised the mech boys. Here he was, a prisoner of war, suggesting to his captors that they should adopt the values of their enemies. But something about the Orks' genuine curiosity, their willingness to listen and try to understand, rather than simply destroying what they did not comprehend, made him want to share the philosophy that had defined his entire existence. But why? Borguz pressed. If something's weak, it's gonna get stomped anyway. That's just how things work. Strong eats the weak, and the biggest boss gets the best stuff. Protecting the weak just means they stay weak, innit? Baken considered how to answer that. How to express a concept that was so fundamental to Salamander philosophy that they rarely examined it explicitly. Strength without purpose is just violence. Any creature can destroy. Any fool can take what he wants by force. But to build something, to protect something, to create a future where the next generation can be stronger than you were, that requires a different kind of strength. The kind that comes from choosing to restrain your power in service of something greater than yourself. The words hung in the air of the workshop, profound and strange against the backdrop of scrap metal and crude machinery. Three Orks who had spent their entire lives in a culture that valued strength above all else found themselves confronting a philosophy that suggested there were more important things than personal power. It was a concept so foreign to their experience that they struggled to even frame it properly in their minds. Yet something about it resonated. Perhaps it was because Orks, for all their brutality, possessed their own form of community loyalty. They protected their clanmates not out of weakness, but because the mob was stronger than the individual. They followed their war boss, not just from fear, but from a genuine belief that he would lead them to the best fights. In their own crude way, they understood the concept of loyalty to something larger than oneself. "Use a strange humie," Gricket said finally. "But I think I'm starting to understand why you fought so hard. You wasn't just fighting for yourself. You was fighting for all them other humies what couldn't fight for themselves." He paused, his mechanical hand scratching at his scarred head. That's actually pretty proper, that is, in a weird sort of way." The unlikely understanding. As days turned into weeks, the relationship between captive and captors evolved in ways that neither side could have anticipated. The mech boys continued their experiments, carefully documenting how Baken's systems functioned and slowly learning the principles behind Imperial Dreadnought technology. But their work had taken on a different character, less focused on simply stripping the machine for parts and more interested in understanding the warrior within the shell. Gricket had ordered the other Orks to stop calling Baken Dahumia in the box and start using his actual name. It was a small gesture, but significant in Ork culture, where names carried weight and recognition. Enemies were just targets, obstacles to be crushed or blasted out of the way. But warriors who earned respect through their actions deserved to be acknowledged as individuals, and Gricket had decided that anyone who had held the line for 3 days against impossible odds had earned that much at least. The breakthrough in their understanding came when Snazgit, while examining the neural interface connections, noticed something that his larger colleagues had overlooked. The patterns in the data streams connecting Baken's brain to his former Dreadnought shell showed spikes of activity whenever they discussed civilians or protection. It was as if those concepts triggered stronger responses than tactical discussions or questions about combat capabilities. "What's this about?" the smallest mech asked, pointing at the readouts he was examining. "Every time we talks about defending them weak humies, your brain goes all funny like. Why's that?" Baken considered the question, recognizing that he was being asked to explain something so fundamental to his identity that he had never really examined it consciously. "Because that is what defines me, not the weapons I carry or the battles I've won. Those are just actions, means to an end. What makes me who I am, what has kept me sane through 5 centuries in this tomb, is the knowledge that I fight for something worth protecting." he found himself sharing memories that he had not accessed in decades, experiences from the early years of his service that had shaped his understanding of what it meant to be a salamander. He told them about his first deployment as a full battle brother, assigned to protect a refugee convoy fleeing from a dark Eldar raid. How he had seen families torn apart by the cruel Xenos, children taken as slaves while their parents were left to die in the smoking ruins of their homes. That experience had crystallized for him the fundamental truth that would guide every decision he made for the rest of his service. There were beings in the galaxy who inflicted suffering simply because they enjoyed it, who saw weakness as something to be exploited rather than protected. And against such cruelty, the only moral response was unwavering opposition, the absolute commitment to stand between the predators and their prey, no matter what the cost. Grisnak Irantif himself visited the workshop during one of these conversations, drawn by reports from his mechs about the unusual prisoner they had captured. The massive war boss stood before Baken's sarcophagus, his power claw flexing as he listened to the salamander's words. When the story was finished, he grunted thoughtfully. "You's talking about the weak like days worth something," the war boss rumbled. "But weak things get eaten. That's just how it works. Why waste time defending things what can't defend themselves?" It was the same question that Borguz had asked, but coming from the war boss, it carried additional weight, the fundamental challenge of their entire worldview. "Because strength is only meaningful if it serves a purpose," Baken replied, his mechanical voice steady despite the vulnerability of his position. "You Orks, you fight because it's what you were made to do. You're genetically programmed for war, born from fungal spores with instinctive understanding of combat. But even you must have something you protect, something you value beyond the next battle. Your clan, perhaps. Your war boss. The Orks who fight beside you." Grisnak's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been consideration crossing his brutish features. "The mob's different. They can fight, even if they ain't as big as me. We's all Orks together." He paused, his small eyes fixed on the sarcophagus, as if trying to see through the armor to the warrior within. "But you's talking about protecting humies what can't fight at all. What's the point?" "The point," Baken said slowly, "is that they are what we are fighting for, not territory or resources or glory. The actual people, the individuals with their own dreams and fears and hopes. A child who wants to grow up to be a craftsman, a woman who hopes to see her grandchildren before she dies, a man who simply wants to provide for his family in peace. These are not grand ambitions, but they are real, and they are precious, and they deserve to be protected from those who would destroy them for sport or profit." The workshop fell silent as the Orks processed this philosophy, trying to reconcile it with everything they understood about how the universe worked. In their experience, the strong survived and the weak perished, and any other arrangement was simply delaying the inevitable. But here was a warrior who had proven his strength beyond question, who had held them off for 3 days in combat that earned their deep respect, arguing that using that strength to protect the weak was not just acceptable, but noble. Snazgit was the first to speak, his voice hesitant. "So, you thinks the whole point of being strong is to protect things what ain't?" It was a question that seemed to genuinely puzzle him, as if he was trying to fit together pieces from different puzzles. "Not the whole point," Baken clarified, "but an important part of it. Strength without compassion is just tyranny. Power without purpose is just destruction. What separates a warrior from a murderer is that the warrior fights for something beyond himself, for principles or people or ideals that matter more than his own survival." Gricket's mechanical fingers drummed against his tool harness as he thought. "That's actually pretty clever when you think about it. If you's protecting all dem weak humies, and some of dem become warriors later, then you's making more strong things instead of less. It's like planting crops instead of just eating all the food right away." The analogy was crude, but demonstrated genuine understanding of the long-term implications. "And it's more than just tactical thinking," Baken added. "It's about what kind of future you want to create. Do you want a galaxy where the strong simply prey on the weak in an endless cycle of violence? Or do you want something better? A place where strength is used to create stability and safety so that others can flourish? The question hung in the air, profound and challenging, asking beings who had never considered anything beyond the next fight to imagine a fundamentally different way of existing. It was asking orcs, creatures designed and bred for war, to comprehend the concept of peace and to see it as something worth working toward, rather than simply a boring stretch of time between battles. Grisnak Arantif stared at the sarcophagus for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Gricket and spoke in their own language, a rapid exchange that Baken could not follow. The mech boy responded with equal intensity, gesturing at the various readouts and displays surrounding the life support systems. The war boss asked questions and received answers, the conversation growing heated at points before finally reaching some kind of resolution. When Grisnak turned back to address the captured salamander, his tone had changed subtly. "You's given me and my mechs some find to think about, Humie. Most prisoners we takes, they just curse us or beg or try to tell us military things we don't care about. But you's actually tried to make us understand what makes you fight. That's..." He paused, searching for the right words. "That's proper brave, that is. Or proper stupid. Maybe both." "My chapter has a saying," Baken replied. "Into the fires of battle, unto the anvil of war. We are forged in violence but tempered by compassion. If I am to die here, at least I can die knowing I stood for something worth dying for. And if by some miracle I survive, perhaps this conversation will not have been meaningless." The war boss grunted what might have been respect or amusement. It was hard to tell with orcs. "You's an odd Humie, Salamander, but I think I'm starting to see why your lot gives us so much trouble. It ain't just that you fight good, it's that you actually care about what you's fighting for." He turned to leave the workshop, then paused at the entrance. "Keep working on fixing his systems," he told Gricket. "I wants to see if we can get him moving again. Might be useful to have a Dreadnought what knows the value of protecting things." Brother's desperate search. 800 light-years away, on the volcanic surface of Nocturne, Chapter Master Tushan sat in his private chambers, reviewing reports that had been delivered by astropathic message just hours before. The Third Company's strike cruiser had emerged from the warp with news that would have devastated a lesser chapter. Brother Ancient Baken was missing, presumed lost when Orc forces overran Prometheus's hope. The Salamanders had fought valiantly and ultimately succeeded in their mission, evacuating all 40,000 colonists before withdrawing under heavy fire. But in the chaos of the retreat, they had been forced to abandon their fallen Dreadnought, unable to recover his massive frame before the position was completely overrun. Captain Enkeln's report was precise and thorough, documenting every attempt made to retrieve their fallen brother. 3 separate rescue missions had been attempted, each turned back by the sheer weight of Orc numbers and firepower. The Third Company had taken significant casualties trying to recover Baken's shell, losing 2 tactical squads and a Devastator squad before Enkeln made the painful decision to prioritize the living over the dead and order a full withdrawal. "We did not leave him willingly," the captain's report concluded. "Brother Ancient Baken bought us the time we needed to complete the evacuation, and his sacrifice will be remembered in our chapter's halls. But I must recommend that we do not mount a recovery operation at this time. The Orc presence in the system has grown to overwhelming strength, and risking more brothers to recover what is almost certainly an empty shell would be strategic folly." Tushan read the report 3 times, his massive hands steady despite the fury that burned within him. He understood Enkeln's reasoning, recognized the tactical soundness of the decision. A chapter master's responsibility extended beyond any individual warrior, no matter how honored, and the cold calculus of war sometimes demanded terrible sacrifices. But understanding did not make acceptance any easier, and Tushan found himself thinking about the warrior trapped within that fallen Dreadnought shell. 500 years of service, 500 years of waking to fight and sleeping between battles. watching generations of brothers come and go while he remained trapped within his mechanical prison. Thousands of civilians saved through actions that ranged from holding choke points against impossible odds to simply staying with frightened children until help arrived. And now, if the standard assumptions held true, Baken's consciousness had finally ceased, his organic components failing when his life support systems were destroyed, granting him the final rest he had been denied for so long. Except Tushan knew that assumption might be wrong. Dreadnought sarcophagi were built to survive catastrophic damage to the surrounding shell, designed to maintain life support even when completely separated from the machine they controlled. If Orkish weapons had disabled the Dreadnought without breaching the sarcophagus itself, then Brother Ancient Baken might still be alive, trapped and helpless in the hands of Xenos, who had no reason to show mercy. That possibility, slim as it was, changed everything. Tushan had been chapter master during the Second and Third Wars for Armageddon. He had seen what Orks did to their captives when they bothered to take any. Human prisoners were worked to death in slave camps or used as test subjects for increasingly creative forms of violence. The thought of a salamander, especially one of their honored ancients, suffering such a fate was intolerable. He activated the Vox link to his command staff, calling together his captains and senior advisors for immediate consultation. The gathering took place in the chapter's strategic planning chamber, deep within the fortress monastery on Prometheus, Nocturne's moon. Tactical displays showed the Prometheus's Hope system, now designated Red for hostile control, surrounded by neighboring systems and potential approach vectors. Brother Ancient Baken may yet live, Tushan told the assembled officers without preamble. His sarcophagus was designed to survive exactly the kind of catastrophic damage Captain N. Kellen reported. If the Orks have captured him intact, we have both a duty and an opportunity. Captain Mirzan of the First Company, the Fire Drakes, was the first to speak. A rescue operation into Ork-controlled space would require significant force deployment, he said carefully. And there is no guarantee that the Orkish forces will have preserved our brother's sarcophagus, rather than simply destroying it for scrap. I am aware of the risks, Tushan replied. But I am also aware of our chapter's obligations. We do not abandon our brothers, living or dead, and if there is even a chance that Brother Ancient Baken survives, we must make every effort to recover him. His gaze swept across the assembled officers, challenging any of them to argue against action. None did. Whatever reservations individual captains might have harbored about the tactical wisdom of the mission, none were willing to voice them in the face of their chapter master's determination. The Salamanders had built their reputation on their willingness to sacrifice for others. It would be the height of hypocrisy to refuse to extend that same commitment to one of their own. The planning phase took 3 days of intensive work. A strike force would be assembled consisting of 2 full battle companies plus supporting elements. Enough strength to fight through Ork resistance, but not so large as to strip the chapter's other commitments. The 4th and 6th companies were selected, both at full strength and recently returned from successful campaigns. They would be supported by elements from the 1st company, including a squad of Terminators, and by the chapter's available Dreadnoughts, who viewed the mission as a personal obligation to their entombed brother. The approach would be made via the Cicatrix Maledictum's outer edges, using the turbulent warp storms to mask their fleet's movements until they could emerge at the system's periphery. From there, they would conduct reconnaissance to determine the Ork warband's current disposition and locate Baken's sarcophagus if it still existed. The mission timeline was aggressive, driven by the knowledge that every day's delay reduced the chances of finding their brother alive. Master of the Forge, Mirzan, was tasked with preparing specialized equipment for the recovery. If Baken's sarcophagus was found but separated from its Dreadnought shell, they would need portable life support systems capable of sustaining him during extraction. If he remained entombed within the disabled Dreadnought, they would need heavy lifters and transport capacity to carry the entire assembly back to their ships. Every contingency was planned for, every possible complication addressed with typical Salamander thoroughness. But beyond the tactical planning, Tushan felt the weight of a more personal obligation. Brother Ancient Baken had been serving the chapter since before Tushan was born, had fought in campaigns that were now legend, had embodied the salamander ideal of protection through sacrifice. If he still lived, trapped and alone in the hands of their enemies, then every moment he suffered was a stain on the chapter's honor that demanded immediate action. The strike force departed Nocturne 4 days after the initial report reached the chapter, their fleet cutting through the warp with desperate speed. In the ready rooms and meditation chambers, Salamanders prepared themselves for what they knew would be a brutal fight. They checked their weapons and armor with ritualistic care, each warrior knowing that they went not in search of glory or conquest, but in pursuit of a single objective, bringing their brother home, the rescue and aftermath. The Salamanders' approach to the Prometheus's hope system was conducted with a stealth that seemed at odds with their reputation for direct action. Their strike cruisers emerged from the warp at the system's edge, using the asteroid fields and debris clouds for cover as they conducted long-range auger sweeps of the Ork-held territory. What they found confirmed their worst fears. The greenskin presence had grown significantly since the Third Company's withdrawal, with multiple Ork cruisers in orbit and clear evidence of fortified positions on the planet's surface. But the Salamanders also had advantages that pure numbers could not overcome. Their scouts, some of the best trained in the Imperium, infiltrated the Ork positions through a combination of careful planning and calculated aggression. Infiltrator squads deployed via drop pod to the planet's surface, using jamming equipment and careful positioning to avoid detection while they mapped out the enemy's disposition. And gradually, piece by piece, they assembled a picture of where their brother might be held. The breakthrough came when a scout team detected unusual energy readings emanating from what appeared to be a mechboy workshop on the outskirts of the main Ork encampment. The power signature matched that of Dreadnought life support systems, and thermal imaging suggested active maintenance work being conducted on sophisticated Imperial technology. It was exactly what they had been searching for, and Tushan wasted no time ordering the assault to begin. The attack came at dawn, when even Orks were at their least alert. Thunderhawk gunships screamed down from orbit, targeting the Ork anti-aircraft positions with surgical precision. Drop pods slammed into the ground around the workshop, disgorging Salamanders who moved with coordinated fury toward their objective. Terminators teleported directly into the heart of the encampment, their stormbolters clearing approach routes while their power fists smashed through crude Ork fortifications. Inside the workshop, Gricket and his fellow mechs heard the sounds of battle approaching and immediately understood what was happening. "Dahumi's mates are coming for him," the old mech said, not with anger, but with something almost like satisfaction. "I knew they would. Those salamanders don't leave their own behind." He looked at the sarcophagus where Baken had spent the past weeks. The life support systems they had carefully maintained and even improved with their crude but effective modifications. "Should we fight them?" Borguz asked, already reaching for his weapons. The sounds of combat were getting closer, the distinctive roar of Space Marine bolters cutting through the morning air. But Gricket shook his head. "Nah, we's learned enough from the Ancient, and I ain't keen on getting squashed by a bunch of angry salamanders." He walked over to Baken's sarcophagus and knocked on it with his mechanical hand. "Oi, Salamander, your boys are here. We's gonna leave before they turn us into paste, but I wants you to know something first." Trapped within his prison, Baken felt a surge of emotions so powerful they threatened to overwhelm his discipline. Hope, relief, gratitude, all mixed with the strange melancholy of knowing that his captivity was ending, and with it, this bizarre period of communication with his former enemies. "Speak quickly, mech boy. My brothers will not show mercy if they find you here. We's been thinking about what you said, about protecting the weak and fighting for some fine besides just fighting." Gricket's voice carried an unusual weight, as if he was trying to express something profound, but lacked the vocabulary to do it properly. "I don't think we's gonna become all soft and start defending humies or nothing. We still Orks, and fighting's still the best thing ever, but maybe we can be more careful about who we's fighting and why." You showed us that being strong ain't just about crushing every find smaller than you, Snazgit added, his smaller voice barely audible over the sound of approaching battle. It's about choosing what to do with that strength, and that's something we ain't never really thought about before. You have given me much to consider as well, Baken admitted, his mechanical voice softened by genuine emotion. I spent 500 years believing that all Xenos were simply threats to be eliminated. But you three showed me curiosity instead of cruelty, respect instead of ridicule. You could have destroyed me or tortured me, but instead you sought to understand. That is not what I expected from Orks, and I will carry the memory of it for however many years I have left. The workshop's entrance exploded inward. Bolt of fire from Salamanders in crimson and green armor, cutting through the crude fortifications like paper. But by the time they breached the interior, the mech boys were gone, escaped through a back entrance that led into the maze of scrap and tunnels that made up the Ork encampment. What the Salamanders found instead was Brother Ancient Baken's sarcophagus, intact and functioning, sitting in the middle of a workshop that showed clear evidence of careful maintenance rather than destructive experimentation. Tushan himself entered the workshop, his massive form filling the doorway as he surveyed the scene. His eyes fell on the sarcophagus and the displays showing stable life signs, and for a moment, the chapter master's iron discipline faltered. "Brother Ancient Baken," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "we have come to bring you home." "Chapter Master," Baken replied, his mechanical voice stronger now that hope had returned. "I am glad to hear your voice, though I must tell you that my time here has been far stranger than you might imagine." The recovery operation took less than an hour, the Salamanders establishing a defensive perimeter, while Tech Marines worked to stabilize Baken's sarcophagus for transport. The Orks mounted several counterattacks, but they were disorganized and easily repelled by the superior firepower and discipline of the Space Marines. By the time Warboss Grisnak Ironteeth organized a serious response, the Salamanders were already withdrawing, their Thunderhawks carrying the recovered Dreadnought back to their strike cruisers in orbit. During the long journey back to Nocturne, Tushan visited Baken's sarcophagus regularly, listening with growing fascination to his brother's account of the weeks spent in Ork captivity. The story of the mech boys' curiosity, of conversations about philosophy and purpose, of finding understanding in the most unlikely of places, challenged everything the chapter master thought he knew about their enemies. "They were Orks," Baken said at one point, his mechanical voice thoughtful. "Brutal, crude, designed for war, but they were also capable of curiosity, of genuine interest in understanding rather than simply destroying. They asked questions I have not had to answer in centuries, forced me to examine beliefs I had taken for granted. And in the end, I think we both learned something valuable from the experience." "What did you learn?" Tushan asked, genuinely curious. "That even in the darkest places, humanity can find expression. That compassion does not require gentleness, only the willingness to see value in others. And that the line between warrior and weapon is thinner than we like to admit. But maintaining that distinction is what keeps us from becoming the monsters we fight." Tushan was quiet for a long moment, processing words that carried the weight of 5 centuries of experience. "And what do you think the Orks learned?" he finally asked. "I hope," Baken replied slowly, "that they learned there are things worth protecting, principles worth fighting for, beyond the simple joy of violence. I do not expect them to become peaceable or civilized by our standards. But perhaps, somewhere in that warband, there are now Orks who understand that strength can serve purposes other than domination. And perhaps that understanding will spread, slowly, over generations, until it changes something fundamental about how they view the universe." It was an idealistic hope, perhaps naive even. The Orks were what they were, creatures of violence shaped by genetic imperatives older than human civilization. But Tushan found himself wanting to believe that communication could change even the most entrenched patterns, that understanding could create bridges where none should exist. Philosophical implications. Upon returning to Nocturne, Brother Ancient Barken's sarcophagus was installed in a specially prepared Dreadnought shell, one that incorporated some of the modifications that the Ork mech boys had made to improve his life support systems. The irony was not lost on the chapter's tech marines that their ancient brother's survival had been aided by Xenos technology they would normally refuse to even examine. But pragmatism won out over pride, and Forge Master Mirsin personally oversaw the integration of the improved systems. The weeks that followed saw extensive debriefing sessions where Barken recounted every detail of his captivity and the conversations he had with his captors. Librarians attended these sessions, documenting everything for the chapter's archives while also analyzing the psychological impact of such an unusual experience. There was concern, carefully voiced, that Barken's time among the Orks might have affected his judgment or commitment to the Imperium's cause. But when asked directly about his loyalty, Barken's response was immediate and uncompromising. "I hate the Orks no less than I did before my capture. They are a threat to everything the Imperium represents, and I will fight them with every weapon at my disposal until my final rest. But hatred does not require misunderstanding. I can despise what they are, while still acknowledging that they are more complex than we have given them credit for. And that complexity, that capacity for something beyond pure violence, is actually what makes them so dangerous." The distinction was subtle but important. Recognizing that Orks were capable of curiosity and even a crude form of respect did not make them any less of a threat to human civilization. If anything, it made them more dangerous because it suggested they were capable of adaptation and learning in ways that simple-minded brutes would never manage. An enemy who could understand your philosophy was an enemy who could potentially find ways to counter it, and that made vigilance more important than ever. But there was another implication to Barken's experience, one that resonated deeply with Salamander philosophy. If even Orks, creatures designed and bred for war, could show curiosity and attempt understanding, then surely humanity's enemies were not monolithic in their evil. The galaxy was full of threats that needed to be opposed with overwhelming force, but perhaps not every Xenos species was beyond all possibility of communication or coexistence. This idea was heretical by the standards of the Imperium at large, where the official doctrine was that all Xenos were threats to be eliminated without mercy or consideration. The Inquisition would have serious concerns about any Space Marine chapter that suggested otherwise. But the Salamanders had always operated under a slightly different philosophy, one that prioritized the protection of human life over the destruction of alien threats. If protecting humanity could be achieved through means other than eternal war, was not that worthy of at least consideration? Tushan called a council of his senior officers to discuss the implications of Barken's experience. The conversation ranged widely, from tactical considerations about how Ork psychology might be exploited in future conflicts to deeper philosophical questions about the nature of the enemy and the purpose of the Space Marines' endless crusade. We are taught from our earliest training that the Xenos is a threat beyond all possibility of redemption, Captain Mirsan said thoughtfully. And for most species we encounter, that assessment is accurate. The Tyranids exist only to consume. The Dark Eldar delight in suffering. The Necrons seek to exterminate all organic life. But the Orks... He paused, choosing his words carefully. The Orks fight because it is what they were made to do, not because they hate us or want to destroy us specifically. They are a threat, certainly, but perhaps not an absolute evil. Does that distinction matter? Asked Captain Takir of the 6th Company, who had led the assault force that rescued Barken. Whether they fight from malice or instinct, the result is the same. Human worlds burn. Innocent people die. Our duty is to stop them, not to understand their motivations. I disagree, Chaplain Navos interjected. Understanding your enemy is always valuable, even if that understanding does not change your ultimate course of action. Brother Ancient Barken's experience suggests that Orks are capable of restraint when given reasons to exercise it. Could we not use that knowledge to minimize civilian casualties in future conflicts? To create situations where the Orks' natural curiosity leads them away from population centers toward military targets we can defend more easily. The discussion continued for hours, exploring implications and possibilities that ranged from the practical to the theoretical. But underlying it all was a fundamental question that every salamander present felt in his core. What was the purpose of their strength? Was it simply to destroy the Emperor's enemies? Or was there something more, some higher calling that their Primarch Vulcan had understood when he shaped the chapter's philosophy? Librarian Velkona, one of the chapter's most respected psychers, offered perhaps the most profound observation. We speak of the Orcs' capacity for understanding as if it is something new, some revelation that changes everything. But is it not simply the same truth that has guided our chapter since its founding? That beneath the violence and the war, beneath the genetic modifications and the indoctrination, consciousness persists. The Orcs are conscious beings, and consciousness inherently creates the possibility of change, of growth, of becoming something other than what you were designed to be. You suggest, Tushan said slowly, that the same capacity for transcendence that we claim for ourselves must logically exist in our enemies as well, that if we can rise above our conditioning to show compassion and restraint, then perhaps they too can exceed their programming. I suggest, Velkona replied, that the universe is more complex than our doctrines allow for, and that rigidity of thought is as dangerous as any physical enemy. Brother Ancient Barkin was forced by circumstance to see past his assumptions, and what he discovered was not that the Orcs were good or innocent, but that they were real, actual beings with thoughts and interests beyond simple destruction. And that reality, uncomfortable as it may be, is something we ignore at our peril. The Council concluded without any formal declarations or policy changes. The Salamanders would continue to fight the Emperor's enemies as they always had, with fire and fury and unwavering commitment to protecting human life. But among the officers present, something had shifted, some subtle change in perspective that acknowledged the complexity of the galaxy they fought to defend. For Brother Ancient Baken, the experience had created a different kind of burden. He found himself thinking often about the mech boys who had captured him, wondering what had become of them and whether the conversations they shared had any lasting impact. It was a strange form of connection to feel toward beings who by all rights should be nothing more than enemies, and he struggled to reconcile this feeling with his duty as a space marine. During one of his meditation periods, when his Dreadnought shell was powered down and he existed in the liminal space between full consciousness and sleep, he tried to examine this paradox. How could he maintain both hatred for the Orcs as a species and a kind of respect for the specific individuals he had encountered? How could he commit to their destruction while hoping they might somehow become something better? The answer, when it came, was quintessentially Salamander in its philosophy. He could hold both truths because they operated on different levels of reality. On the strategic level, the Orcs remained a threat that needed to be opposed with overwhelming force. Their invasion of Prometheus's hope had endangered 40,000 civilian lives, and that fact alone justified any action taken against them. But on the individual level, Gricket and Borguz and Snazgit had shown him that even enemies could be more than faceless monsters, that consciousness created moral complexity regardless of species or circumstance. This realization did not make his duty any less clear, but it did make it more painful. Every Orc he killed in future battles might be someone who could have learned, could have grown beyond their programming if given the chance. But protecting humanity required difficult choices, and the luxury of exploring that possibility could not take precedence over the immediate need to save lives. The tragedy was not that he had to fight, but that the galaxy was such that fighting was necessary, that curiosity and understanding had to take second place to survival. Closing, the weight of memory. Months after his rescue, Brother Ancient Bakken found himself deployed once again, this time to defend an agricultural world from an Ork raid that threatened to disrupt food supplies for an entire subsector. The deployment was routine by his standards, the kind of operation he had participated in hundreds of times across 5 centuries of service. His Dreadnought shell strode through the fields of golden grain, weapons systems tracking Ork raiders who had come seeking violence and found space marines instead. But something was different this time. As he fought, as his assault cannon spoke thunder and his power fist crushed greenskin armor, he found himself paying attention to details he might have overlooked before. The way individual Orks moved, the patterns in their tactics that suggested thought rather than pure instinct. The occasional moment of hesitation when they encountered civilians, as if some of them were at least considering whether these weak humans were worth bothering with. Most of the Orks showed no such restraint, of course. They were what they had always been, brutal and direct in their pursuit of violence. But a few, just a few, seemed to evaluate the situation before attacking, seemed to weigh whether the fight was worth the effort. And Bakken wondered if perhaps, somewhere in the vast Ork collective consciousness, the idea of selective engagement was spreading, the notion that some targets were more interesting than others. He would never know if Gricket or his fellow mechs survived the Salamanders' assault on their workshop. The chances were good that they had escaped, as Orks were remarkably hard to kill and notoriously difficult to track once they decided to disappear into their own territory. But even if they had fallen in battle, the conversations they shared might have influenced others, might have created ripples that spread through the Ork collective in ways too subtle for human understanding. When the battle ended and the agricultural world was secure, Bakken stood at the edge of a field, watching human families return to their homes. Children ran through the golden grain, their laughter carrying on the wind. Adults began the work of repairing damage and restoring order, confident that the Salamanders would protect them while they rebuilt. It was a scene he had witnessed countless times across countless worlds, and each time it reminded him why he fought. But now, there was an additional layer to that understanding. He fought not just against the enemies that threatened these people, but in service of a principle that extended beyond immediate tactical considerations. He fought because consciousness was precious, because the capacity for thought and growth and change was something that deserved to be protected even when it manifested in unexpected places. The civilians he defended and the Orks he battled were not so different in the end, both subject to forces beyond their control, both trying to navigate existence in a galaxy that seemed designed to crush anything soft or vulnerable. That night, as his sarcophagus was prepared for the sleep that would carry him through the weeks or months until he was next needed, Bakken dictated a message to the chapter's archivists. It was part testimony, part philosophical meditation, part warning for future generations of salamanders who might one day face similar circumstances. "I have learned," he said slowly, his mechanical voice carrying the weight of 500 years of existence, "that memory is both burden and blessing. I can no longer recall my mother's face or remember my father's voice. The specific details of countless battles have faded into darkness, and each awakening finds me more distant from the human I once was. But the core truths that define us, the principles we choose to embody regardless of circumstance, these persist even when everything else is stripped away. My time among the Orks taught me that the galaxy is more complex than our doctrines allow for, that consciousness creates moral weight regardless of species or programming. I do not regret my duty or question my chapter's mission, but I carry with me now a fuller understanding of what we fight against and what we fight for. We oppose tyranny, not with counter-tyranny, but with principled resistance. We protect the weak, not because they deserve it, but because we choose to value vulnerability over predation. And we maintain our humanity, not by avoiding difficult truths, but by embracing the full complexity of existence in all its tragic beauty. To future brothers who may read these words, remember that you are more than weapons. Your strength serves purposes beyond destruction, and your consciousness imposes obligations that transcend tactical expediency. Fight with fury when fighting is needed. Show mercy when mercy is appropriate. And never forget that what makes us salamanders is not our ability to kill, but our commitment to protecting life in all its forms. The recording ended, and Baken's systems began their shutdown sequence. As consciousness faded and the darkness of sleep reached up to claim him, his last thoughts were not of battles or victories or the eternal war that defined existence in the 41st millennium. They were of a small orc named Snazgit, asking with genuine wonder why anyone would choose to protect the weak, and of his own answer that strength without purpose was just violence, that power without principle was just tyranny. It was a simple truth, but one that had sustained him through 5 centuries of mechanical existence. And as sleep finally claimed him, Brother Ancient Baken felt something that he had not experienced in longer than he could remember. A kind of peace, the knowledge that despite everything, despite the horrors and the losses, and the slow erosion of self, he had remained true to the ideals that defined him. He was a salamander, a son of Vulcan, a warrior who remembered that beneath all the metal and machinery, he fought to protect rather than simply to destroy. And in a workshop somewhere on an orc-held world, a mech boy named Gricket looked at a piece of machinery he was repairing and found himself thinking about a conversation he'd had weeks before. Thinking about what it meant to be strong. Thinking about whether might always had to make right, or if there were other ways of viewing the universe. The thoughts were crude and fragmentary, shaped by a mind that was not designed for philosophical contemplation. But they were there, and perhaps that was enough. Thank you for watching this exploration of what happens when an orc warband captures a Salamander's Dreadnought who still remembers why he fights. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the complexity of consciousness and compassion in the grim darkness of the far future, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are more stories to tell from the Warhammer 40k universe, more examinations of the principles and philosophies that define its most interesting factions. Until next time, remember, even in the darkest places, humanity can find expression, and the choice to protect rather than destroy is what separates warriors from weapons.